Thanks for tuning in to Minds of Tomorrow. I'm your host, Luis Acevedo, and with me today I have Zoltan Istvan. He was a political candidate. He is the author of the #1 best-selling book for philosophy and science fiction. It is The Transhumanist Wager. Also, he starred in the documentary Mortality or Bust. Zoltan, thank you very much for coming on the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Of course. So I think a good place to start for us is to dive into the reasons why you jumped into the political scene and why on such a radical platform. And I don't mean radical in a negative way. It's just totally different than any other political platform that we've seen thus far.
Well, I mean, one of the reasons I dove into it is because, there was nobody else doing it. So it's really nice to have a science political campaign, one that really is just pushing science and technology forward, as opposed to somebody who, focuses only on taxes or on immigration issue, abortion issues, whatever. So I really thought it was a good idea to get science and technology in the political framework in hopes that some of the bigger politicians might actually take some of these ideas and run with it. It just seemed to click. I think a lot of people are very interested in science, and they do realize that there should be political candidates that run under that kind of banner, or at least as their main priority.
Right, and I'm sure you weren't well received by the masses in general, simply because of the narrative behind the agenda behind the transhumanist movement being, curing death and enhancing human life via technology. And it's not uncommon, because a lot of people who present these ideas that shift the Overton window and disrupt the status quo receive a lot of hate, if you will. So what kind of feedback did you receive when you were actually on the campaign, and even now when you talk about this with everyday people, because it's still a novel ideal for most people?
Right. Well, I mean, I think the reception has certainly improved. I ran for the presidency in 2016, and for the governorship, California in 2018, then later for the presidency again in 2020 on different parties and, different schemes, but always as a science candidate, a transhumanist candidate. And, it seems to get better received every 2-4 years. And the reason is because I think, especially with Corona, people have become more enamored with the use of science in their lives, especially if it's sort of saving society and keeping progress going. And so it's gotten better. There's no question about it. I mean, when I first, jumped on board and was talking about, my candidacy for U.S. presidency in 2016 actually began in 2014. So that's when a lot of the news hit. 2014 was still a very early time to be talking about overcoming death with science. In 2021, it's no longer a niche topic. It's very, in some cases, extremely mainstream. There are now many billionaires investing in longevity. There are many people talking about what would we do if we all lived 20, 30 years longer. So the good news is that transhumanism and push for immortality through science, or at least push to overcoming death through science and technology, has become much more accepted. And I think from a political point of view, people are saying, wow, it's something that needs to be discussed. And it's good that we discuss it.
Right. So what was it that drove you to become a transhumanist and start this movement? Was there like any one event, or was it, an amalgamation of events that sort of got you to where you are today?
Sure. Well, basically I was working as a journalist for National Geographic and had kind of a close call with a landmine in Vietnam. I was covering of course, post-war story. There were a lot of landmines in the ground still there, and I was covering some of the people that were undigging these bombs and landmines that were in the ground, and had a very close call with them. It scared me so bad, it kind of made me dedicate my life to trying to overcome death with science as a result of that experience of being so afraid. And of course, the movement, transhumanism, and the movement for life had long existed before myself. I mean, this is something that people have been dreaming about since Frankenstein and way before. And it kind of took more formal shape in the 90s and then the early 2000s, and then really, I think, it took a big boost in around the time of my presidential campaign, because that just got so much mainstream coverage, for good or worse, a lot for the worse, but still, it was, at least there was coverage, and I think it kind of exploded in terms of the popularity of the movement. But it really began for me personally with a very close call, I think, with death, that made me think, well, death is no good. Why aren't we doing more about it in society, and what can we do about it? And then, lo and behold, transhumanism is a social movement that's trying to address that as their number one concern.
Usually when you hear people have a near-death experience of some sort, they gravitate towards religion or some sort of spirituality. But rather than do that, it appears that you're still looking for more, I would say, pragmatic ways to avoid death or, experience some sort of immortality. Now, this, to me and to others, it could seem to go against the natural order of things, and that being the cycle of life and death. And I think that's a big concern with a lot of people when it comes to the transhumanist movement, is the dehumanization and the kind of going against nature.
Well, I mean, transhumanists fundamentally don't believe that anything is natural. We certainly don't, think that nature is something that should run its course. We think, we want to take nature in our hands and form it and make it what we want to be, just like we want to take our bodies and make it. We want to, well, most of us want to get rid of our flesh. Most of us know our flesh is terminal, our brain is terminal, our heart has got a limited amount of beating capacity, and we would like to upgrade that either through machine parts, robotic parts, synthetic parts, or who knows, uploading our brains and just to ones and zeros in a machine at some point in the future. I'm sure that's going to happen 100, 200 years in the future. But I mean, the point is, we don't want to die, and there are a lot of different ways for avoiding death. Death in the human body occurs because organ failure is primarily the reason. And if we can use synthetic organs when our organs get old, we can overcome death in many ways. And then, we have other things like may not be able to do that so easily with the brain, but there are different types of ways that we'll probably get around that, different types of drugs. And so there's nothing natural about dying, in my opinion. I mean, maybe they say it's natural because we've always been doing it, but when we start extending our lives, as we've already doing, I mean, we've doubled the lifespan of 100, 200 years ago. It was that unnatural? No, that was it's not really natural or unnatural, not really words transhumanists use. They like to think of things in terms of what can we achieve with our hands, what can we achieve by our reasoning ability, and how can we take science to the next level, and what we can do, as long as it's within preserving human nature, preserving our humanity. And again, doesn't mean preserving the flesh of human beings. It just means preserving the constitution of what we are as a society, as of a history. That is something that can, I think, be manipulated and formed and pushed forward for generations here until we become something very different. But we'll still always have our humanity. Our humanity isn't tied to being the physical portion of being a human being or even a mammal. Humanity is tied to our goodness, our kindness, our reasoning, our love of one another, our ability to, our desire to explore, to see where the stars lead. So, I mean, we're going to keep our humanity with us, whether or not we become pure artificial intelligence one day, I believe.
Yeah, with the rise of virtual reality and the talk of the metaverse, I've thought a lot more about what is it to be human, because when you enter into these virtual realms, you're still like, eventually it's going to get so immersive where you actually can feel, in that world in a real way. And then it puts into question, well, then what is it to be alive? And so, what you're saying is, very interesting. And I tend to agree with what you're saying as far as, manipulating nature to better suit us. That is exactly what we do. Now, there is a concern also with this movement, though, and the manipulation of nature, and that being, I remember hearing you say that you would like to reallocate funds if you were to win the presidency, and then or for the government to reallocate funds from military to more scientific research. Now, the concern is, well, we already see what happens with the mass funding of the military. We get the military industrial complex. It's basically controlling everything, and we're giving away our data, and it's contributing to these artificial intelligent drones that are killing people in the Middle East and things of that nature. So what's to say that reallocating these funds to more scientific research won't just turn into what people fear, a technocracy, especially when you have in today's world a real issue in science with there being a reproducibility crisis that isn't really talked about, where 2/3 of scientific research are invalid because people can't reproduce them. So I guess the concern would be, and the question would be, technocracy, the rise of technocracy with the reallocation of funds to the more scientific way of thinking. How do you think that would play out, if that makes sense?
Yeah, no, I mean, technocracy and oligarchies, I mean, these are all great worries of the future. And certainly I think there's a real danger of that. That said, I don't believe that, taking, my estimate was take half the military funding and put it into life extension science and just generally science, make us a science industrial nation. I don't think that necessarily means that science is going to, are going to be driving our lives forward, because you have to realize, like, military is driven by power. And so when you talk about why a military industrial complex is morally wrong, or at least ethically questionable, it's because it's driven by power, where a science industrial complex is going to be driven by reason and by wanting to improve the human being. So even if it is sort of ruling our lives, it's kind of like reason ruling our lives. Well, of course, reason rules our lives. I mean, we don't want to be irrational about everything. If we were irrational, we wouldn't know how to even plant crops or cure the first cavity we got, or just everything would be crazy all the time. So I think science is led by the scientific method. The scientific method says we're never really fully right about anything, but we keep trying to prove it again and again through reason. And if we do that, eventually we'll get closer to the truth of things. And if that's the case, and even I would love to be ruled by that kind of concept, because it's not like a warmongering military industrial complex that wants to rule because it rules through the growth of power or the desire of power. Science's desire is improvement of ourselves, improvement of reason. So I don't mind a technocracy of science. And I think that's probably the way we're going to go at some point. It's the question of, technocracy in terms of, do something rule over us that's irrational? Well, I think that might work. Again, when we're talking about semantics. There's technocracy of the military industrial complex, which can be very dangerous. And then there's technocracy, or let's just say our leaders and the government is always saying we must listen to the science, in a way being ruled by science. I think that's a very different kind of game, no matter how you spin the words. And I'm happy to give my obedience to science, because science, again, by the scientific method itself, the most important idea of the scientific method is you can never be right. This isn't some politician saying, oh, we're right. This is a philosophy that says you can never be right. You have to prove it again and again and again. And through that, you always have a sense of humility. So, again, it's words with, and semantics and things like that. But I would be happy to be ruled by a science industrial complex that is out for my best aim. I think that would really push the species. I mean, that's sort of what Star Trek is. And that's why that society, I think, was so wonderful.
Mm-hmm. And I think that this would tie along the same lines of what I think it was Plato, I could be wrong, who came up with was basically saying that the autocracy, that there's, the smartest people and the wealthiest people should be the ones controlling society, because they would, obviously know how to, social engineer. And I know that's a negative connotation behind it, but in reality, all cultures are, socially engineered in a way, so that way you can have some sort of cohesion.
Yeah, but I think what's different, though, even with the oligarchy ruling, which is not something I would support. I would support simply, like, and this is why I've said, if at some point artificial intelligence comes and there are overlords, I would probably be on board with accepting something like that, assuming that it did not mean a sacrifice of my freedom, but it might mean, like, it constantly gives me input on how to live a better, a longer life. I mean, this is why, benevolent dictators have often been the very best rulers. Now, it doesn't really work with human beings, but it might work with an algorithm that really is just out for the single best use of yourself, as well as in towards society and making us all better. I mean, what if it really was? It's almost like, let's just say hypothetically God. I'm not a religious person, but let's just say that, there was a God out there that really cared for you and wanted the best for you. And that's sort of like what I'm hoping one day might be artificial intelligence using the scientific method, something that always looks out to make your life better and better, and really in a very selfless way. And I think that could very well happen. And that is quite different than an oligarchy. That's quite different than a military industrial dictatorship. That's quite different than even a benevolent dictator. I think when we're talking about the rule of science over our lives, it's very different because it's going to be only about us. It's truly selfless, I think, and altruistic in its own right.
So you're not concerned with the thought of artificial intelligence becoming smart enough, smarter than humans, and then replacing humans, and not really caring about our well-being. That isn't a concern of yours, because I mean you're throwing in game theory as well, right? Because if you have two different intelligent beings,
Yes.
I mean,
No, I'm very worried about artificial intelligence. Super worried. My hypothetical that I just gave you was, imagine if we had an AI where we could kind of guarantee that it was after our best interest all the time. That would be an ideal scenario for me. However, no, rarely do ideal scenarios ever take place. And there is a very good chance, I'd say, that AI ends up not either caring about us whatsoever or seeing us worthy of just destroying for whatever reasons. It's probably given how fast it might accelerate its intelligence, probably would care very little about us, almost in the same way, alien species, for example, that may have already evolved millions of times smarter than us, see us sort of like ants. And ants can't fathom an alien of that intelligence. Our brain, they're 3 pounds of meat. They just can't understand it. So at some point, maybe the AI would not care about us. But the reality is, like if you're given kind of a game theory situation where you have a choice and you could actually guarantee you might have a selfless algorithm that really is out there, AI algorithms working for your best benefit. That could be an ideal scenario for humanity, for dealing with things like universal basic income, for eliminating all disease, for everybody having a platform. Right now, I got to be honest. Yes, we have presidents, they're left, they're right, but are they really after us? Or are they actually after a little bit of power? Is there a mix? Are they imperfect? Yes, they are. We have all sorts of too many dimensions going on. And so as a result, society is not failing on so many levels, but certainly never even close to perfect. So I think there's a lot of room for improvement. And I see AI and technology hopefully bringing some of that improvement, as long as we can keep it under wraps so that it doesn't want to destroy us somehow. Now, again, that might be very challenging to do, but that would be the ideal scenario.
Right. Of course. And I guess so. The last question I would have for you is, what is the goal of the transhumanist movement, and what are you currently doing to, help push that forward?
Well, so, I had run for office for, a couple years in a row, actually, a couple cycles in a row. And I chose not to do that this time around because COVID made it very hard to go out. And a lot of what I was doing, I really didn't have any chance of winning elections yet. But I had a chance to go out and get a lot of media coverage and generate a lot of information for transhumanism. However, with COVID, that became very difficult to do. So you really needed to do it differently, and have a base of people already supporting you. So I've kind of sat out the last few years, but I have been working on a business, wine business. I have 3 different vineyards, and we're trying to infuse our wine with nootropics and things that might help you become smarter, might live longer. That's just a side business. I'm actually going to be probably heading back to school here. I have some news coming out in the next month or so, but we'll keep that in the wraps. But I probably will be pursuing some graduate degrees. I'm also, we've had the documentary come out. We're working on an international release, Immortality or Bust. I've also published now my 7 books, which is the kind of the futurist collection of Zoltan Istvan, and the different books that are all my different essays. So I'm keeping busy. But it has been a strange time. I used to be campaigning all the time out on the road, and COVID has made that very difficult. But I think the world will be getting back to normal. You'll probably see me for sure on the campaign trail again. It just seems like it was a good time to sit this cycle out and do a lot more writing and reading and working on documentaries and some longer term pieces for the movement itself.
Awesome. Fair enough. So before we leave, is there any, like, where could people find your work? You know, if they wanted to support you, maybe find your books.
Sure. Well, the great thing is I just finished, I published my 7 books of essays. So now there's a kind of a futures collection of books. So you can just Google Zoltan Istvan and look at, they're all on Amazon. And of course, my novel, The Transhumanist Wager, is out as well, which is, you know, what am I doing? Some of the things we're doing is we did secure German translation rights. So that should be out in 2 or 3 months. There's also a biography being written on my work in transhumanism. So that should be out in a few months, we're hopeful. So, you know, just Google my name and go to Amazon or whatever, and you'll find it. I also have a website, zoltanistvan.com, but mostly it's just, I think, Googling, you can find whatever you want. I've done, you know, hundreds of interviews and written about 250 articles, some for the New York Times, some for other places. So you can find a lot of my, if any topic you're interested in, like if it's robotic arms, or if it's military and you know, and transhumanism, or if it's you know, transhumanism and space travel, you know, I've written an article probably on it. So just Google that topic and you'll find it. And they're across 20 or 30 different sites, TechCrunch and Vice and NY Times, Newsweek. So wherever it is, you'll find something good to read.
Awesome. Well, Zoltan, thank you very much for coming on the show. It's been a pleasure.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. It's been great talking to you.
Of course.